Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Hi, and welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Ashley Hall. On this week's episode of Common Ground, DuWayne Schwindt of Bemidji shows us the many details of Intarsia art. Steve Bmer, a harness and saddle maker from Brainerd, uses leather to create a wide range of functional and stylish harnesses for horses. Plus, Jon Normann of Rochert turns forms with lustrous finishes from wood that many would discard.
My name is Jon Normann. I live in Rochert, Minnesota, on one of the lakes around Rochert. I'm retired from stained glass. We had a studio in Fargo for 25 years, and it was time to quit and do something else. So we moved out to the lake, and this is where we are now. This is a chunk of white birch, obviously. It came from a friend's house. The tree died, so he cut it down and gave me 5-6 pieces. I always chunk it up, and we've got a low spot by the driveway back there. I throw it in there, and hopefully it'll spalt for me. Spalt is a fancy name for rotten. This is a spalted box elder. And box elder usually has some nice red running through it. But spalting are these little lines that form in here. And how they get there, when the fungus and bacteria attack the wood, the different colonies of fungus and bacteria eventually meet each other, and they don't like each other, so they build these carbon fences to keep one colony away from the other colony. And that's what spalting is. Okay, check this for balance and make sure it doesn't fly off the machine. We'll keep turning this until we get the bark off, and we'll get a round cylinder piece of wood, and we'll check and see what kind of figured grain we've got going in here. And if it looks good, I'll keep turning, and if it doesn't look good, I'll throw it back in the low spot down there and let it spalt some more. The lathe I've got is a Powermatic. It weighs about 800 pounds, and I like it because it's got a variable speed on it, and I can adjust it according to how off balance the lathe is. So you can turn it up a little bit. It's starting to balance out a little bit. Here's where a tree branch came out. There's a little bit of pink in there, and I don't know what that's from because birch very rarely has pink in it. When birch spalts, usually it spalts with these brown lines in there. Birch by itself, when you turn a fresh piece of birch, it's usually pretty white. So if you can get it with these knots in it and be able to save that, or if you can get it to spalt, it usually looks a lot nicer that way. This is a piece of wood that came from the same tree right next to the one I just turned. So hopefully all three of these pieces, the spalting has gone through the whole thing, and it'll look good that way. I put a foot on the bottom here so I can put a scroll chuck on. For safety reasons, the faster you can get it on a chuck, the better off you're going to be. I've had logs fly off the lathe and go through the wall before, so I tend to think safety first now. What I'm trying to get out of this thing is not a perfectly round sphere, but kind of an oval shape. I think it's probably a little more interesting, but the spalt lines are starting to show up a little bit better. So here's some nice stuff going through here. This looks pretty dull right now, but when we get some wood hardener on it and a finish, these will pop out and they'll really look nice. Okay. See, now this one I can speed up because it's all balanced and everything and it won't shake the lathe apart. And usually I try to run it about 1,000 RPMs. There we go. I started wood turning in late 90s. My daughter was getting married. My wife suggested that I make something rather than run to the store to get something. And I had never turned before, and there was a guy in Fargo that taught classes, so I took a couple classes from him, and we wound up making a Vienna wall clock for my daughter. I didn't have a lathe, and I didn't know how to run a lathe. I didn't know what the tools were for. So about a year before she got married, I took the classes. I've been turning ever since. And I started out on that little lathe right there. I'm getting a little tear out in here, and that's just because I'm pushing the gouge through too fast. So when I get my general shape roughed in, then I go back and take really fine light cuts and pour some wood hardener in here and then take my final cut. Hopefully I won't have any more tear out, but right now it doesn't matter if it's there or not, but in my finished product I can't have it. So we'll take some light cuts here and see what happens. I've got the outside pretty much shaped up the way I want it. I haven't gone all the way down to the bottom yet because the pot is still in the scroll chuck, and if I get it too narrow here, this thing will vibrate on the lathe as I'm hollowing out the inside. We start out with a straight tool. After we drill a hole, the hole goes to about a half inch from the bottom or so. And we enlarge the hole with a straight tool to as wide as we can get it. And then we start using a shallow hook tool. Oops, sorry. Use a shallow hook tool to help enlarge that hole even a little bit more. And after we go as far as we can with this one, then we go in with the deep hook tool. And we'll slow the lathe down to about 500 or so. With these tools, if you get going too fast and you get a catch on the inside, it's like fighting an alligator. And it really throws you around the room a lot. The outside, I think I've got it where I want it. This is one of those instances where your hands can see more than your eyes can. If I've got a dip or a bump in here, usually you can't see it at all, but you can feel it. And if I feel something I don't like, then I just take it out. I've gone about as far as I can with this one. The wall in there is probably a 1/4 inch thick. If I get it too thin, I have the chance of blowing it out and ruining the pot. So I try to stick with a 1/4 inch or so. The next step after this would be take it out of the chuck, put it on the shelf for about 3 months till I get the moisture content down to around 10% or so. And then by then, this thing is gonna be a little bit oval shaped. I'll put it back in here and turn it round again and then cut the base off and put the finish on. These little pots that I've done is basswood. And basswood by itself is pretty boring. There's not a lot going on. It's awfully white, so I dip these in dye and let them dry for a couple days. And then I airbrush the tops on and build up the lacquer. And that's where they come out looking like glass. This is black ash burl. Burls are never round. They're always oblong, or there's a void in it, or whatever you find. What I like most about this piece is the contrast between the smooth wood and the rough bark. This is the first one I've ever made like this. Yeah, I didn't know how it would turn out, but I think I'm going to make more if I can find the right kind of wood to do it. These two came off the same burl that I got, and I was lucky enough to get a big chunk on this one. That's the way it finished off the lathe, and I thought it needed something more, so I made the finial top for it. This is a piece of box elder that I got from my son. All the spalting in here, this thing has probably been dead for 2 years or so. There's a big bark inclusion flap here that almost came off when I was turning it on the lathe, so I had to put about 3-4 ounces of super glue in here to get it to stay and flatten out. Spalted wood is really pretty, and you never know where you're going to go with it. I think what I enjoy most about it is well, number one, seeing what turns out. Mother Nature really makes some pretty cool stuff sometimes, and if I get lucky, I can find it and turn it on the lathe. The second most enjoyable thing is different kinds of wood react differently on the lathe. Some woods are really hard and they chunk out a lot. Some are really soft, like pine, and it's really hard to get anything out of it at all. It's so soft. But if I can save it and the wood is nice, I think this stuff is absolutely gorgeous.
My name is Steve Vollmer. We operate Vollmer's Harness and Saddle Shop, Nisswa, Minnesota. And we order our leather according to how we're going to use it. And we can order it the thickness we want. Now this is a very heavy piece of russet harness leather. This is a piece of rawhide that has not been tanned. And each different leather has a different purpose, a different way we use it. First, we make sure the customer has a measuring chart, and they take the measurements of their horse or their team, and then we put those measurements into the specifications of the harness, and then when we get all those measurements down, then we start cutting the leather. The customer can specify if they want a black harness or a russet harness, if they want solid brass hardware, or perhaps they want stainless steel hardware. Ornaments, we have spotting machines that will spot the harness, and they can either decide if they want a spotted harness or a plain harness. That's all part of designing what they want. We make the harness that they want. All of our leather that we use is cowhide. It all depends on how it's tanned as to how it's used in a harness or in a saddle for that matter. We generally use heavy black drum-dyed harness leather, which comes to us dyed black on both sides, drum-dyed, and we just start cutting it from the side of leather. We first square it and get a straight edge. And then this is a draw gauge. We can cut any width strap we want with this gauge. This is a creaser. We run it through this creaser, and this rolls the edge of your leather and puts a crease on each side. It kind of dresses it up a little bit. This is a clicker die. After cutting all the straps, we cut all of these dies. We have a lot of various shapes for dies. This stamps out the shape that we need, and we can cut a lot of various different kinds of shapes that all fit into the harness. Saves a lot of time. These two machines here are spotting machines, and what they do is put the decorative spots onto harness or sleigh bells. You just put your leather in, and with the foot feed apply the spots. They clinch in the back and make a nice decorative harness. They make these spots now in stainless steel hardware, so they'll last a long time, won't tarnish, and really decorate up a harness real nice. This is our main sewing machine here. This is a Randall Union lock stitch machine, and they still make the machine. All the NFL footballs are sewed on this machine. It's called a lock stitch. Your awl comes down, puts the hole through your leather. We can sew up to 3/4 of an inch in thickness. Your needle comes up, catches the thread, and connects with the bobbin, locks it underneath, and you have a lock stitch. Should that stitch be cut for any reason, it will hold on either side because it's locked in place. This is fairly typical of the harness that we manufacture in our little shop here. This is a single draft driving harness used on a buggy or a cart or a vis-a-vis for pleasure driving. It's stainless steel, leather, single driving harness. Harnesses really haven't changed that much over history. They're a very functional piece of equipment, but it's fun when a person has a special request or a special little something they want in a harness. It's fun to try and expand your creation a little bit and make something a little different. I would say on average it takes between 40 and 60 hours to make a harness, depending on how elaborate it is. I like to study the Old West. This country was settled on the backs of horses with teams, and from the work horses to pioneers crossing the country. I like reading and studying about that. It's a fascinating part of the history of this country, was how this was settled. And we take part in wagon trains out in South Dakota and have crossed the prairie with wagon trains. It's an amazing thing what our settlers did to settle this country, heading out west with a team of horses and a wagon and heading for Oregon or California or wherever they were going. And they had to find water and graze for their horses and teams. And it's an amazing part of our history that I hope we never lose.
Since starting with Intarsia back in 1999, my rough count estimate is going to be that I'm somewhere approaching 60 completed Intarsia pieces in the 12 years since I've been doing that. Intarsia is the art of selecting woods, arranging their grains, sculpturing them to complete a picture. And it goes back to the early 1500s, or the 15th century with, in Italy, with the artisans down there that started this. When I'm cutting, I'm really cutting small pieces. And several years ago, I quit using a bandsaw because these pieces are so small, and a bandsaw is not forgiving. You know, take your finger and I found out I was cutting pieces and then trying to catch them at the back of the blade, and so then I went into scroll sawing, and since then they always say with a scroll saw you can't even cut your finger. I had my third grade grandson spent several hours just over the weekend starting his first scroll sawing, so he could be maybe a future Intarsia artist, who knows. These grapes here they're all individually cut and hand shaped, and they're actually on 3 different levels. That gives that 3-dimensional look. And it gets so crazy when you start doing these pieces that I have to number everything on the back because I could never get it back together again because of the different levels that are supporting this, and then because it's got to fit just a certain way. And how I got into Intarsia work is that I used to build birdhouses, and then all of a sudden for one birdhouse I hand carved with my sanding tools, a black lab, and I put it on the porch, and then I did a boat, and I did a fish on a cleaning table, and I got all that, you know, and I thought, God, I like this. I need to find something else. And so I think maybe it was my wife found it, or I got introduced to Intarsia, and I was able to self-teach myself with their manuals, and this is where I've progressed from that. And that's the thing is to create the three-dimensional look at when you look at it. The coloring all comes from whatever I can find in the wood. So when I go to any place, I always look at their wood because I'm looking for a certain grain. If it catches my eye, even though I don't have a piece for it, I like to buy it and take it home so that I've got it. You never know when I'll need it. The pattern comes to me like this. The first thing I do with a pattern like this is I go down to one of our local printing shops, and I have this reproduced on black and white paper because I like to lift the ink off of the pattern. And just by pressing this heated tool, following over the outline, it will pick up the ink that the copier uses to reproduce. These are all pieces for the hummingbird. As you can see here, there's like 15 pieces in the wingspan that we have right here. I save pieces. I knew I needed a red for the throat of the hummingbird because I wanted to use that in there. And so we'll go over to the scroll saw and I'll actually cut a piece off of here. And one thing you do is when you're cutting hardwoods, because it's so easy to stress your blade, is that I like to check to make sure I still have a vertical edge on here. And so periodically as I'm cutting, I will also keep checking with that. So that is one of the many pieces. There are 25 pieces of wood here. I have a solid maple sunflower center. It has poplar petals. I will join all the components into one using carpet tape, and so that when I'm shaping this, I get an equal symmetrical texture all the way across, as opposed if I carve these two pieces apart, I'll get different thicknesses and then I'll just be chasing one after another. I know that this is going to be coming into the frame. Once I've completed the shaping on that, then I'll do is finish fine sanding it. Using different types of woods, my poplars, my walnut hardwoods. It's all hardwoods and it's on a birch back, which we will also seal. And it's a polyurethane seal that we'll put on there. And when I'm finished, I'll have at least 3 coats of varnish hand rubbed into that. So there never has to be any additional finishing. If you have indentations, you have to really try to sponge it in there. There are 10 pieces of hardwoods in here, granadilla wood and walnut. There's some etching in here with a wood burner. And so what we'll do now is we will assemble this piece. Always have to be careful so that the amount of glue that you're putting on there is minimal. This piece is set up and glued, and generally what I will do, is, and I find I have my best luck, is to set it aside and keep my fingers off of it. And I won't do anything with this now until tomorrow. I never get the feel of what I have, what I've created, until it's all done. And I'm able to take it up and I just prop it up on the wall. And that's the first time when it just becomes overwhelming, because now I see it in all of its natural colors. It's been all these finishes are hand rubbed polyurethane. And say, how'd I like it? It's a good one.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we look forward to seeing you next week right here on Common Ground. If you have a segment idea for Common Ground pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3022. To view this episode or any Common Ground segment, visit us at lptv.org/Common Ground. Individual segments or copies of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.